Watch a black man in his 50s fall in love, and you'll notice something curious. Somewhere behind the laughing eyes and the easy conversation, there's a door that never quite swings all the way open. You've seen it if you've ever loved one. He gives you 95% of himself, generous and warm and present, and holds that last 5% like a spare key he's not sure he'll ever hand over. Ask him about it, and he'll shrug it off. "I've just been through some things," he'll say, or "I don't do labels," or the old reliable, "I'm just a private person." Now sit with that for a second, because private isn't the same as guarded. Guarded means something taught him, a long time ago, that the wrong kind of trust could cost him everything. This caution shows up especially, and especially complicated, when the woman on the other side of that door is white. Not because of who she is as a person, but because of what his body still remembers, even after his mind has moved on. That's the part nobody talks about at the cookout or the bachelor party. We call it trust issues, like it's a character flaw, a bad habit picked up somewhere along the way, something a good woman can just love out of him. But trust issues in a man like this are rarely random. They're inherited, passed down like an old coat that still fits, whether he ever asked for it or not. Stay with me, because we're going somewhere real. This is the story of a specific kind of caution, forged across generations, worn by men who never got a vote in the fitting. Here's the deeper truth hiding underneath the surface behavior. What looks like emotional distance is often a survival system, built by people who loved this man before you ever did, for reasons that made complete sense at the time. A black Gen X man, born somewhere between 1965 and 1980, didn't invent his own caution. He grew up inside somebody else's fear, in a house where love and warning often arrived in the very same sentence. His father's father remembered a world where a rumor, a glance, or a lie told by the wrong person could end a black man's life before sundown. That world didn't vanish the day the calendar flipped to 1970. It just changed its clothes. So when this man learned how to love, he learned it with an inherited flinch already built in. Nobody sat him down and explained the syndrome. They just handed him the reflex and called it common sense. Let me show you what this actually looks like, because it isn't abstract. It shows up in kitchens, cookouts, and quiet cars in parking lots. Watch closely, because you've probably witnessed every one of these scenes before and just didn't know what you were looking at. It's a Saturday in July, and the whole family is packed into Uncle Ray's backyard, plates balanced on knees, gospel and go-go bleeding together from a speaker somewhere. He brings her, the woman he's been seeing for 8 months, and introduces her with a voice pitched just a half step too casual. Watch his eyes instead of his mouth. He's not really watching her. He's watching the room watch her, clocking every raised eyebrow and every pause a half second too long, filing it all away like evidence. His mother hugs her warm and easy, but his uncle gives a nod that reads more like inspection than welcome. And by the time they sit down to eat, he's not tasting the food at all. He's running security detail on a party that was never supposed to need one. That's cool pose, working overtime at a cookout, controlled, watchful, performing ease while quietly doing the math in the background. He learned that math before he learned long division, and he's been running the numbers ever since. Monday morning, the barbershop is doing what barbershops do best: half therapy session, half courtroom, all opinions. Somebody brings up the girl you've been seeing, and the whole room goes quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when everybody's waiting to see how a man answers for himself. "You know how that story ends," an older man says, not unkindly, clippers still moving. He never finishes the sentence, because in this room he doesn't have to. Everybody already knows exactly which stories he means. The young man laughs it off, but the joke lands somewhere it wasn't supposed to. He walks out with a fresh cut and an old warning humming underneath his hairline, reactivated like a song he thought he'd forgotten the words to. Now flip the scene, because she has a story in this too. It's 11 at night in a grocery store parking lot, and she's just asked him something simple, why he goes quiet like that sometimes, and watched something close behind his eyes like a shade being pulled. He gives her the easy version. I'm good, just tired. She knows it isn't the whole truth because she's felt this particular silence before, the one that shows up right when things start to feel too good, too easy, too real. She isn't the enemy here, and neither is he. They're both standing on opposite sides of a door built before either one of them was born, and neither one was handed the blueprint. Different scene, same man, 10 years younger. He's the only black supervisor on a job site full of white contractors, and a friendly woman from the front office stops by just to chat, easy, harmless. He keeps it short and professional, 3 feet of visible space between them at all times. Not because he dislikes her, because somewhere in his gut lives an old, exhausting equation about what a friendly conversation can turn into if the wrong person retells it wrong later. That's hypervigilance clocking in for unpaid overtime. It never really punches out, not at the cookout, not on the job, not even in a love he genuinely wants to keep. Now let's rewind, because none of this started with him. To understand a black Gen X man's caution, you have to go back further than his own birth certificate, back to a set of rules written in blood long before his father learned to walk. During slavery, a black man's proximity to a white woman was never a matter of romance. It was a matter of life and death, decided entirely by other people's suspicion. A glance held a beat too long, a rumor with no evidence behind it, could summon a mob before the sun went down. Jim Crow didn't end that danger, it just organized it into etiquette. Black boys were raised on an unwritten code: don't look, don't speak first, don't ever be caught alone in a room, because those rules were never written to protect you, only to convict you. Journalist Ida B. Wells spent her life documenting how often those crimes were fabrications, accusations used as cover for lynchings rooted in economic jealousy and social control. History remembers the name Emmett Till for exactly this reason. A 14-year-old boy killed in 1955 over a false claim that outlived him by decades. That story never stayed in 1955. It got told and retold at kitchen tables for the next 50 years, turning from a news story into something closer to family scripture, a warning passed down like a Bible dog-eared at the very same page. So by the time a black Gen X man's father sat him down for the talk, it was never really about dating advice. It was inherited protocol, updated for a new decade but still running on very old code. Then the 1970s and 80s piled their own weight on top of that older foundation. Deindustrialization shut down the factories that had held entire black communities together, pulling steady paychecks out from under fathers who'd built their whole identity on providing. The war on drugs arrived next, sentencing black men to years in prison for the same offenses that barely touched white communities down the street. Whole blocks of fathers, uncles, and older brothers disappeared into a system that seemed to be waiting for them, and the boys left behind learned early that trust was a luxury their families' men couldn't always afford. Then came the crack epidemic, tearing through neighborhoods and marriages with the same cold indifference, turning some households into war zones built out of broken promises. A Gen X boy watching his mother wait by a window for a man who wasn't coming home learned an early, brutal lesson about what happens when you hand somebody your whole heart. Layer all of that onto the older inheritance about white women specifically, and you get a man who learned to read a room the way a farmer reads the sky, always watching, always bracing for a storm that might never actually come. That's not paranoia. That's a body trained by a real historical weather system that used to kill without warning. There's a name for the toll of working twice as hard just to break even. Researcher Sherman James called it John Henryism, the high-effort coping that keeps a man standing tall on the outside, while it quietly wears him down on the inside. It shows up in blood pressure numbers and premature gray hair, sure, but it also shows up as a chest that never fully unclenches, even at 2 in the morning, lying next to someone he loves. Psychologist Joy DeGruy described a related pattern in her work on intergenerational trauma, adaptive behaviors that once kept people alive under slavery, still echoing generations later as vacant esteem, suppressed anger, and a hair-trigger alertness to danger that isn't even standing in the room anymore. Nobody chooses to inherit that. It just arrives, folded quietly into the family furniture like everything else that got passed down. And there's Du Bois's old, aching phrase for the exhausting math of being watched, a 2ness, always measuring yourself through eyes that were never built to see you clearly in the first place. A Gen X man running that math inside a relationship isn't being paranoid. He's executing a program that got installed long before he ever learned to talk. Here's what's easy to miss in all of this. None of it was foolishness. Every piece of that caution worked at some point for somebody who genuinely needed it to work. The etiquette that kept black men alive under Jim Crow wasn't cowardice. It was tactical genius, dressed up in the clothes of humility. A man who could read a room fast enough to survive, it was doing something most people never once had to learn. The hypervigilance that shows up on a first date is the very same tool that once meant the difference between going home and not going home. You don't throw away a tool just because the war it was built for changed its shape. Think of it like a hammer handed down from a grandfather who built houses with his own 2 hands. It's heavy, it's old-fashioned, and it still drives a nail straighter than anything you'd buy new. The problem was never the hammer, it's that nobody ever showed him there might be other tools in the box. This particular caution earned real respect in barbershops and church pews for generations. A man who didn't act a fool, who kept his composure, who read the room before he read anything else was called wise, was called solid, was called somebody you could count on. So understand him clearly, he isn't broken. He's using a tool that's still sharp, in rooms that no longer require it, simply because nobody ever sent him the memo that the war was over. Now let's laugh for a second, because this is also just funny, and black folks have always known how to find the joke living right inside the ache. You know the uncle, every family has one, who greets your new girlfriend with a firm handshake and a look that says he's already run a full background check in his head. He asks her 3 questions that sound casual and are not casual at all. There's "so what do your parents do? How long y'all been together?" And the classic closer, "You sure you're ready for all this?" Which really means him, means the family, means a few centuries of history he's not about to unpack at a cookout. Big Mama, meanwhile, will hug her tight, hand her a plate she never asked for, and still pull you aside in the kitchen later to whisper, "She seem all right for now." It isn't cruelty. It's due diligence with a side of potato salad. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious once you're not the one being interrogated. Every family runs this same little Homeland Security department, and every Gen X man secretly appreciates it, even while he's rolling his eyes the whole time. Deep down, he knows precisely why they're asking. But here's the turn, and it's a heavy one, so stay with me. A tool built to survive one war can quietly start a brand new one, right in the middle of a home that was supposed to be safe. Carrying decades of hypervigilance into a relationship is like keeping a security system running in a house nobody has ever broken into. The alarm still goes off, the lights still flash, and the woman standing next to him has no idea what she supposedly did to trigger it. This is the cost nobody puts in the highlight reel. Real love, offered freely and consistently, can start to feel like a trap to a nervous system trained to expect betrayal. And somewhere in the middle of all that fear, the bill for 40 years of self-protection quietly comes due. Some men handle this by staying just distant enough to never fully arrive. They'll give 95% forever, decade after decade, and call that last 5% just who I am, instead of naming it for what it really is, a door still bolted shut from a war that ended before she was even born. John Henryism doesn't only cost the body, though it absolutely does that too, showing up in blood pressure cuffs and doctor's visits he keeps putting off. It also costs the relationship a full, unguarded presence, the kind that can only exist once a man finally stops running numbers on someone who was never actually the threat. Sons watch this too closely, whether their fathers realize it or not. A boy raised by a man who loves in careful, rationed doses learns that same rationing, and the inheritance gets photocopied one more generation, a little more faded, still fully legible. Some men lose the relationship entirely. Not in one dramatic explosion, but in a slow leak. A woman who finally stops knocking on a door that never opens, worn out from loving someone who won't let her all the way in. And some men lose something quieter but just as real, themselves. You cannot spend 40 years keeping your guard up inside your own house without eventually forgetting what it even felt like to set it down. Here's the compassionate truth underneath all of it, and it matters more than anything else in this video. None of this makes him weak, or paranoid, or a bad man. It makes him the product of a remarkably intelligent, remarkably costly adaptation that once had no alternative on offer. Nobody is asking him to walk through the world with zero armor at all. That would be its own kind of foolishness, given everything we just walked through together. The world hasn't finished earning that particular trust yet, and pretending otherwise helps absolutely no one. But he doesn't have to wear full armor everywhere, all the time, with everyone he meets. He just needs one room, one relationship, one porch, one late-night kitchen table, where the mask can finally come all the way off. That safe place might be a partner who's earned it through years of steady, patient proof. It might be a therapist who understands the specific weight of this particular inheritance, or a brother carrying the same coat who finally says so out loud. Setting the armor down in one place doesn't undo generations of caution. Nobody is asking for that kind of magic here. It simply means that, for a few hours in one room, a man finally gets to be fully human instead of fully on guard. And that woman who's been standing patiently on the other side of the door, she isn't asking him to forget history either. She's only asking to be seen as herself, and not as a symbol of everything that came before her. So if you're watching this and you know a man like this, a father, a husband, an uncle, maybe yourself in the mirror, understand exactly what you're looking at. You're not looking at a broken man. You're looking at a survivor still wearing his old uniform to a war that is, technically, over. He built that wall with his own bare hands, brick by inherited brick, and it kept men exactly like him alive long enough to have grandchildren who could sit here tonight and watch this video. That's not nothing. That's a debt every single one of us owes to men who had to learn survival before they ever got the chance to simply live. But surviving and living were never the same job, and at some point, a man has to be granted permission to switch from one to the other. Permission nobody ever handed him directly, until maybe right now, from a stranger talking to him through a screen. If this is you, you are allowed to lower the wall for the people who have proven, again and again, that they were never the danger. You are allowed to let somebody love you completely, without keeping one hand on the doorknob the entire time. You didn't invent this caution, and you are not required to carry every ounce of it forever. You inherited a mask that once saved real lives, and you get to decide, starting today, exactly how many rooms you still need to wear it in. Before you go, sit with one more thing. The same history that taught him to guard his heart around a white woman also taught an entire country to keep quiet about how we got here. And real healing only ever starts the way it started for him tonight, by finally saying the quiet part out loud. Somewhere right now, a man is sitting across from someone who loves him, deciding whether tonight's the night he finally opens that last door. If you know him, be patient with the hinges, because they've been rusted shut for a lot longer than you've been alive.